23, Section 5, and it's the Congress of Vienna. The Napoleonic Wars have come to an end. It took a mighty effort, all of Europe ganging up on the French to win this war finally, and now we've got to figure out how to prevent a future Napoleon or a Hitler or a Stalin or anyone from doing this. How do we prevent this kind of craziness? How do we establish order and a lasting peace?
Although France is less than twice the size of Colorado, it is one of the largest countries in Western Europe. It is bordered by Spain, Switzerland, Italy, Germany, and Belgium. The Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, and the English Channel are also on the French border. For more than 300 years, the power of the French king was absolute. This meant that he had the power to do anything. By the summer of 1789, the French people were ready for change. The people demanded equal rights and more power to govern themselves. But when the king refused to grant equal rights to all French people, he and his family were imprisoned in their own palace, and a representative government made up of French citizens, called the National Constituent Assembly, began running the country in his place. Without a king, multiple governments and factions were able to seize power. One of the people who rose to power during these turbulent times was a man named Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon fought many battles for the new French government, and he was able to add about 9,000 square miles to French territory in only 1 year. He finally returned to lead the French people in a revolt against their new government on September 4, 1797. He became the leader of France on November 9, 1799. As leader, Napoleon kept Paris the center of France's government. He also created the Bank of France and the Napoleonic Code, the first modern set of laws in France made without a king. Napoleon wanted to rule all of Europe and beyond. His first step was to make himself Emperor of France on December 2, 1804. Next, he would lead an army of 600,000 soldiers into Eastern Europe and destroy anyone who stood in his way. In June 1812, the army started marching toward Russia. The French emperor planned to add Russia to his empire. But the winter months were harsh in Russia, and the Russians set fire to Moscow, Russia's capital, so that Napoleon would have nothing to conquer. With no protection from the cold and nothing for the soldiers to eat, Napoleon's troops were forced to retreat to France. The distance from Moscow to France was so great that only 10,000 out of Napoleon's 600,000 soldiers survived. The survivors had become so weak that they could not defend France from its powerful enemies. Great Britain, Prussia, Sweden, and Austria were able to invade Paris on March 31, 1814. The leaders of these countries forced Napoleon to give up the French throne. They sent him to live forever on the tiny island of Elba in the Mediterranean Sea. Napoleon was beaten, but not defeated. He and his followers escaped from Elba and returned to France on March 20, 1815. In a matter of months, he rebuilt the French army and became an emperor for the second time. But the leaders of Great Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria did not want to give Napoleon another chance to conquer Europe. These four nations joined forces, and in June 1815, they beat Napoleon's army at Waterloo, in the country known as Belgium today. In his second term on the throne of France, Napoleon ruled for only 100 days. On June 22, 1815, the Allies forced Napoleon to give up the French throne for good and sent him to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic Ocean for the rest of his life. The French Revolution enabled Napoleon to hold more power than anyone else living in the 18th and 19th centuries. He reformed French law and built an empire. But instead of spreading the revolution's message of liberty and equality, he tried to control the destinies of other countries and rule their people. For that, his life ended in exile.
And so let's start with the Congress of Vienna. It was a meeting of nations. Britain came to the table, France, Spain, Germany, Russia, Austria, etc., etc., etc. And the presider of the meeting was a foreign minister from Austria named Clemens von Metternich. Now, Metternich's goal wasn't to give freedom. He's like, freedom. People are too dumb for that concept or nonsense. His idea was to ensure a balance of power. Let's keep France from becoming too powerful, because if they do, what's going to happen? Napoleon's going to rise up and try to conquer the world again. But we can't trust Germany, we can't trust Britain, we can't trust any of them. So we need to make sure that each nation is equally powerful in case something happens, then we can all gang up on that person or that nation.
It was called by some the war to end all wars. Socialists dubbed it the Imperialist War. Soldiers often called it the Trench War. World War I was, in fact, the first modern war, a war waged with the ingenuity of the industrial age, from telegraphs to tanks, movies to machine guns. Despite being a modern war, the roots of World War I were steeped in Europe's tumultuous past. As far back as 1870, France and Germany were enemies. When Germany won the Franco-Prussian War, it seized two French provinces, Alsace and Lorraine. From then on, a competitiveness for European leadership evolved between the two countries, and a spirit of nationalism gripped them both. This nationalism went far beyond simply maintaining patriotic feelings for one's country. Instead, Germany, France, and other European countries believed that the interests of their homeland should always be put ahead of world cooperation. The resulting contempt for one country by another inevitably led to the risk of war. Nationalism was at the root of conflicts between Russia and Austria-Hungary. Russians believed that they were the protector of all of Europe's Slavic people, regardless of which government they happened to live under. For example, Serbia was an independent country, but millions of other Serbs lived under Austria-Hungary's rule. The result was an intense rivalry between Russia and Austria-Hungary for influence over Serbians in the country of Serbia. Poland had been divided among Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia, and wanted to reunite in their own Polish state with self-rule. The Czechoslovakians also wanted freedom and self-determination. Under Austria-Hungary's rule, they were not even allowed to use their own language. Consequently, by 1914, Europe was a hotbed of nationalism, and tensions ran high between the governments and their constituents. While the spirit of nationalism flourished across Europe, many countries were building their global empires. Great Britain and Germany were colonizing Africa and the Middle East in a frenzy of imperialism. France and Germany were now rivals at home and abroad as they clashed over control of Morocco. Russia turned its attention to Europe as she sought control over the Serbs. The contest for international trade, resources, and land soon resulted in a buildup of military strength. The British, Germans, French, Italians, Japanese, and Americans began an arms race, stockpiling weapons, recruiting armies, and launching battleships to protect their interests at home and abroad. As each country amassed countless weapons and beefed up their army and navies, they saw the wisdom of agreeing to military alliances, mutual treaties of assistance that would commit each nation to support one another should they be attacked. By 1914, there were two major defense alliances. The Triple Entente, later called the Allies, consisted of France, Great Britain, and Russia, although Russia had a separate treaty with Serbia. The other, the Triple Alliance, later called the Central Powers, included Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Italy. Italy would later join the Allies. For a little while, these military alliances served as a type of checks and balances system, with each nation reluctant to upset the balance of power. But despite these alliances, war soon erupted. A single event would soon tip the scale. On June 28, 1914, in the capital of Bosnia, a village called Sarajevo, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie were waving to the happy crowds from their motorcade, when a young man leapt from the sidewalk and shot them both dead. The assassin turned out to be a member of a secret society called the Black Hand, whose goal was to reunite all Serbs under one rule. The assassination was used by the Austria-Hungary government as an opportunity to make an example of Serbia and squelch any nationalist uprisings in the future. 1 month later, Austria-Hungary declared war against Serbia. If it weren't for the military alliances, it might have been a relatively small, localized conflict. Instead, one nation after another was pulled into the fight due to their treaties of support. In order to aid its Serbian allies, Russia mobilized its armed forces. Germany, who was obligated by treaty to support Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia 2 days after that. Subsequently, Germany declared war on Russia's ally, France. And 1 day later, Great Britain, who had a treaty with France, declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. World War I had begun.
Now, a few of the underlying theories behind this concept. Number one is the theory of legitimacy. That if we stick to the existing monarchies, it's not a perfect system, but at least it keeps the mob in check. And so, after the Napoleonic Wars, all of the different monarchs that were deposed were restored to power. And the hope here was a restoration of order. And you know, one of the big takeaways from this meeting of the Congress of Vienna is that the European governments worked together to restore monarchies, which granted is anti-democratic, but the main concern was protecting safety. And to also work out fair deals between the different nations in the interest of establishing a lasting peace. Another beautiful takeaway of this is there was not a major war for 40 years. For 40 years, there would not be another major war in Europe. Now, what we're really talking about here is a version of conservatism. Conservatism means returning to the established order. You know, nations have agreed to put down rebellions and revolutions. And so this actually resulted in the concert of Europe. Is that if there's a popular uprising, if there's another French Revolution, then England and Germany and Spain and Russia and so forth will actually send troops to put down that uprising. When Napoleon conquered Spain, you know, you've got to think of the entire Spanish Empire in the New World. Napoleon's conquest of Spain resulted in popular uprisings all throughout Latin America. Many of the former colonies, Mexico gained their independence after the Napoleonic Wars. Chile, Nicaragua, Colombia, etc. All these places gained their independence. Why? Because Spain was conquered by Napoleon. And so those countries saw their opportunity. And so there's a long-term legacy here. A couple of nations gained power. Prussia, which is later Germany, Britain became the most powerful imperial nation. But there's also subsequent revolutions. And so, as a bonus, I have a little fan theory for you guys. So, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Beauty and the Beast.